so here is my iPad. I did get a new iPad because I decided to trade in my larger iPad, and I actually got a really high trade-in value, so I only ended up spending about like $250 on this iPad, so I thought might as well. I also wanted a smaller one because it was actually impossible to find the big cases for the bigger iPad, and it just wasn't as portable. So yeah, I decided on the smaller iPad. My case is just from Amazon, and of course I have the Apple Pencil 2nd generation. My nib is extremely worn down. I do need to get a new one. So as you can tell, I'm going to be showing you guys an updated video on how exactly I illustrate. I do have a screen protector on my iPad. You can probably tell because the glare is pretty muted. It is a Paperlike screensaver. It is not the Paperlike brand. I just bought the least expensive one off Amazon. I will link it down below if you guys are interested. But yeah, I just like having it because it feels much better to me than like a shiny screen. When I am drawing, it just makes it feel a little bit more gritty, just something that I prefer. I do still use Procreate, of course, to do most of my illustrations. So right before I get into Procreate, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is not a Procreate tutorial. I do not use all of the tools available on Procreate. This is just what I use personally. So if you're wanting that, there's a lot of other great YouTube tutorials on here on how to use Procreate, but this is just how I personally use it to create my illustrations. And I've kind of organized my Procreate into different categories and such, but I'm gonna go into my finished pieces folder and start showing you guys the brushes that I use and how I kind of changed up my drawing style on Procreate. So usually for canvases I will use square, and I created my own longer canvas that still fits in Instagram. I just kind of cropped it that way while I was drawing, and I just saved it, and that's what I use now. Let's start with the brushes. This is my color palette. I do not share my color palettes because they tend to change pretty often, and I feel like color palettes are unique to every artist's style. So yeah, that is the color palette that I use now. But here is my brush set. I have purchased a few brush sets over the years just to try stuff out. I will link the 2 sets that I have purchased down below. It was the Yummy Textures pack and then the Visual to Me Artist pack, just because I got so many ads for it and it came with so many brushes and I wanted to try it out. But these are kind of the ones that I've narrowed down to. So my new favorite pencil is this fine tip pen. You can find it in the inking section of the Procreate brushes, and this is what I tend to use when I do most of my line work. It just really helps translate that sketchy look that I have in my sketchbook. So yeah, it's kind of like, the thing is to draw quickly and not really care what your lines look like. But yeah, it also creates some really cool shadows because it looks all scribbly. So yeah, that's my favorite pen basically. Now my second favorite pencil, which is everyone's favorite pencil and I used to use a lot more, is the 6B pencil, which is another great pencil for line work, but it's much thicker and has a much sketchier feel, if that makes sense. It has much more of a crayon look to the pencil. So I use this when I'm wanting more of a simplified, thick line art look. Next top pen is dry ink, which is also part of the Procreate brushes. And I feel like this is another favorite of people. I don't use this one super often just because it is so thick and streamlined. So streamlined is basically when you draw and the lines are kind of more steady rather than looking scribbly like the fine tip pen. But yeah, I usually use this to like fill in spaces, and I still want that rough look around the edges, so I will draw that and then I will drop the color in. Don't do it super often, but that's what I use that brush for. My next favorite pen, which I didn't mention last time, is the noise brush. So a lot of people ask me how I get my textures in my illustrations, and most of the time I'm using the noise brush. Sometimes I like to add an overall layer on a piece. So for example, this piece has a layer of the noise brush on top. So these are all the layers of the illustration, and then right here at the very top I have a black layer of the noise brush. I turn it into an overlay layer on the mode, so normally it would be normal, but I turn it into overlay, and I turn the opacity down somewhere between 20 to 30% depending on the colors of the illustration, but it just adds a nice crispy texture. Let's see if you can see the texture. So this is it off, and this is it on. You probably can't tell on camera, but you can tell when I post stuff. It just gives it a little bit more of a crunchy texture on top. So that is the noise brush. Now getting into all the other brushes, which I don't use as often, but I do like to include every now and then. So starting from the bottom, this is the gouache brush. This brush I very rarely use. I only really use it if I'm doing like super simple illustrations. So for example, I might do a strawberry and I might just want to do this for the strawberry, and it has a very slight watercolory look to it, which I think is really nice. And it's also transparent, so if you layer on top you can see what was underneath, and it kind of gets darker and darker as you start layering it, which I think is really nice. Next we have monoline, and I only really use this one to do the outlines of my stickers because it is super streamlined, meaning again that your lines are very steady when you draw with it. So yeah, I typically only do the outlines of my stickers with this, or if I really do need a precision brush to fill in a color in an area, I will go ahead and use monoline. Powder is from the Yummy Textures, like the food texture brush pack, and I've had it for a while and it's still one that I really enjoy. It can get, I believe I edited it so it could get really small, but yeah, it's just a really nice texture. I sometimes use it for cheeks or for redness on the elbows, and it does tend to like pile up and get darker as you keep drawing on top, but yeah, that's a really nice brush for texture that I enjoy. Now pencil I've actually been using a lot lately to fill the colors in if I want more of a crayon texture. So normally 6B takes a really long time to fill in with, but I've been really liking this big chunky pencil brush from the large brush pack, the Visual to Me brush pack, just because it's a little bit faster and it still has that crayon feel, and you know, it's nice and chunky. Next we have the Grainy Crunchy Grunge Scribbler, and Greasy. I don't really use these honestly, but it is something that I have here just to kind of have as an option, and they are brushes that I've been wanting to experiment with, so that's why I have them here. I think they're really nice brushes with like texture and stuff, so just wanted to experiment with them. I just really haven't reached for them lately. Next we have Salt Shaker, Light Dusting, and Tea Towel, which are all from the Yummy Textures pack. And these are again like texture overlays, much like the noise brush. So the Salt Shaker has some nice speckling. They might all look the same to you guys, but to me they look very different. So yeah, those make really nice overlays. For example, on her overalls you can kind of see that I added an extra texture other than the noise brush. So yeah, I probably used one of those. Rosette is the one that I used before I got the Holy Halftones brush pack. So this one comes with Procreate. I just don't like it as much because the dots are so concentrated, but I am really into like this comic book look of these dots, but this brush is like a little bit small for me because if you zoom out a little bit more you can't really tell the dots are there. So yeah, that's why I use the Halftone noise pen, because it's a little bit larger and the dots are like slightly crispy, which I like. So yeah, and if you press a little bit harder it'll make the dots like really big, but Just keep constant pressure and you'll get some nice crunchy dots. And then finally, sidewalk chalk. I really, really love this one. This one is from the Timmy Textures one of the Visual Timmy brush pack. I really, really enjoy this one. I've been using this one a lot. Just a nice large texture brush. And by the way, this video is not sponsored. These are just the 2 brush packs that I ended up purchasing throughout the months. And I do get asked a lot what brush packs I enjoy. So those are the 2 ones that I enjoy, and that's why I'm mentioning them, because these are some of the brushes that I am really fond of from those packs. So yeah, those are the brushes I use. Now we have this nice little sketched out piece, but I will show you guys how exactly I tend to illustrate. So normally I will actually sketch stuff out on my sketchbook first. I pretty much have stopped sketching on my iPad before. I will always sketch in my sketchbook and trace something from my sketchbook, so we can go ahead and do that. So I kind of want to do this little milky can, so I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of it with my iPad. And then I will go into Procreate. I'm going to choose square. I like to have a little bit of an off-white background, so I change it to that. And then I'm going to go ahead and import the picture. So this is where I can kind of warp and manipulate the sketch to get it how exactly I want it. So now that it's cropped, I'm going to go into distort. So it's this little selection tool right here, and I'm going to use distort, and this kind of affects the perspective of the drawing. So just gonna kind of get the can how I want it. And then I'm gonna use freeform to kind of make it a little bit skinnier. And you can also use warp, and it'll get kind of specific with what you want to do with it. And you can even use advanced mesh and get more specific with it. And now I am going to turn down the opacity so that I can just see it enough so that I can sketch on top of it. And I'm going to use my fine tip brush, my black color, and I'm just going to start tracing over it. So this brush has very, very, very little streamline, so that's why you can see every little kind of jiggle in the line work, which I really enjoy. And as you can tell, I try to not really use the undo command. So if you want to undo something when you're on Procreate, you can just tap it with 2 fingers and it'll undo it. But I try not to undo things as much anymore, just to kind of accept that sketchy look. So I have finished my line work sketch, and now I can go ahead and get rid of my sketch layer underneath. And now I can start filling in. So I think for this one, I'm gonna do some clean filling in. So I'm gonna go ahead and use monoline and fill in the can. I don't really remember what the colors were from when I sketched it, but I'm gonna kind of guess and just kind of do it how I want. Always make a layer underneath. Sometimes I forget to do that. Okay, so I've kind of gotten my base colors down, and I'm going to start seeing how I can play with texture and how I'm going to finish coloring it in. So I'm thinking that for the can, I'm going to add some texture to it. So there is a difference between alpha lock and clipping mask layers. So I'm sure you guys have used alpha lock. So basically, alpha lock is when you tap on a layer, you select alpha lock, and it just locks the layer so that you can draw on that layer and it won't go past it, right? But that's really only good if you're willing to commit to the change that you make to that layer, because once you move on to something else, you can't undo it because it's on that very layer. Now, if you do clipping mask, you open up a layer above the layer that you want to edit on, you tap it, and you select clipping mask. And now you can do the same thing as alpha lock, except if you kind of feel like you messed up or you don't like it, you can turn it off and you can't see it, or you can even delete it if you're done with it, and your layer is still protected and the same. So I am going to go ahead and do a clipping mask. That's what I always choose to do to give some texture to the can. I am going to choose Sidewalk Chalk, and I'm going to use my darker white color, and I'm going to use it all over the can. So that gives it a nice texture, but it kind of lightens it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it into an overlay layer like I normally do with my textures, and turn down the opacity so it isn't as strong. There we go. Now we have some nice texture, but it isn't too overwhelming and it doesn't change the color too much. I'm gonna go ahead and do that to my little green area of the strawberry, but this time I'm gonna use my little dot pen. Gonna make it a little bit smaller. Sometimes I turn these dots into overlay and it just makes it the darker color. And sometimes I just keep it black and I lighten it up a bit. Depends how I'm feeling. I feel like this time I'm gonna keep it black. Yeah, so I'm slowly kind of building variety and character into the piece. For her hair, I'm gonna go ahead and use 6B pencil to kind of scribble it on there. So now we have some gaps in the coloring which look really nice. For cheeks, I will normally use this darker red color, and I will use 6B pencil just so they're nice and textured and they don't look as perfect, because I do like to do circles most of the time. And I just turn down the opacity. So yeah, normally for details, as you can see, I will use 6B, so it gives it some variety and it doesn't look super perfect. It can look kind of messy. Okay, I'm gonna do another clipping mask on the can, and now I'm going to choose what color to do these flowers. So I'm making sure to not think too much about when I'm drawing and coloring, and not really take my time as much. I do it as fast as I can while it's still looking how I want, because again, I go for that like sloppy, sketchy look, and I find that that's the best way to get it. Okay, so don't really like how this yellow is on the pink can. So what you can do to change the color of something, or how I do it, there's many ways to do it, is you have the layer, you can alpha lock it, choose the color that you want to change it to, and then you select it again and put fill layer, and it fills all of it without missing anything, and it does it quickly. So I changed it to this lighter yellow color. Okay, so I'm going to choose to leave the metal parts white. I just kind of like how that looks, but this is basically the way that I illustrate, and these are the tools that I use. So yeah, that is how I use Procreate. I hope this was helpful, and I wanted to do an updated one because I was getting a lot of comments about how much my style has changed, and it has. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.